With the capture of North Africa, the Allies have a few different options. They can either try to go straight for, occupied France and the route that we would take on D-Day and go through Normandy, or they can try to take a different approach. And according to Winston Churchill, Italy was the soft underbelly of occupied Europe, right? He thought that would be the easy way to get into occupied Europe. It turns out that that's not the case.
Right. No easy
but,
task.
but needless to say, the goal of seizing Sicily was to secure the island to be able to use it as a springboard to launch an invasion of mainland Italy, right? So we had to get this island to be able to move logistical supplies, to have a place to launch the campaign. There's all sorts of reasons why, and to open up the Mediterranean, right, to the shipping lanes. So not just resupply routes, but also like commerce as well. They've been closed down now for quite a while because of Nazi occupation. They need to open up the Mediterranean sea lanes as well.
Yes.
Well, because it's still early in the war, and because of the U.S.'s performance in North Africa. Now, that's not to say that we performed poorly, but there was a big learning curve in North Africa by the time the U.S. gets involved. Like, for instance, Kasserine Pass is just it's like a bloodletting. I mean, a lot of Americans die in those battles, and because of that, the overall planners didn't really want to give U.S. troops the role of the main force. They wanted to kind of put them aside as a supporting role, and let the British Army take the role as the main force, the main effort in this operation to secure Sicily. So that's how they kind of go ahead with the plan. And the idea is that the British, both the British and Americans would land at the southern tip of Sicily, and then once they've secured the beachhead, the Brits would move up the eastern coast, and the goal was to secure the port of Messina, which is almost directly across from the tip of Italy.
Okay.
And that would be the springboard, right? From there, we could launch into Italy. We have a good port to be able to shuttle troops, shuttle supplies, you name it. We can do it out of Messina.
Yeah.
While the role of the U.S. Army in this operation would be to move up the western side of the island and protect the left flank of the British troops fighting the Nazis up the eastern coast. So the invasion's going to be launched on the night of June 9th, 1943, and it's going to be initiated with an airborne assault. So you're going to have airborne units as well as glider units trying to get in and secure certain objectives. That portion of the invasion of Sicily is going to it's not going to go well. Bad weather, inexperienced crews, as well as like the German and Italian anti-air defenses is going to cause some real problems. You're going to have numerous gliders get cut loose over the ocean. They'll plummet straight into the ocean.
Oh man,
the entire units will be lost.
Yeah.
It's something like at the end of the day, there's something like only 12 units will land where they were supposed to land. Everybody else lands somewhere they weren't. There's one unit that doesn't even make it out of Africa because of the weather. They fly thinking that they're over Sicily. When they land, they think they're in Sicily, and then they realize they're in North Africa still.
Oh my gosh.
So I mean, it's
It's
a
nuts.
cluster. It's a cluster. Now, Murphy's not an airborne soldier. Murphy is a regular infantry guy,
Okay.
so he doesn't participate in this initial airborne assault. He actually will go in with the rest of the 7th Army, the U.S. 7th Army, on the morning of the 10th. Now, the two armies are broken, like I said, British and American. You have the U.S. 7th Army, and then you have the British 8th Army. The U.S. 7th Army is led by Lieutenant General George Patton, and the British 8th Army is going to be led by Bernard Montgomery.
Okay, cool.
Now, obviously, it's very well known that both these guys have huge egos, right, and huge personalities. Later on in the war, you'll see that play out a lot with Bernard Montgomery when it comes to like Operation Market Garden and Invasion of Holland and all that stuff. But they're very much in competition with each other for credit, right?
Sure.
Obviously, Montgomery wants the British to capture Messina. Patton hates the idea of being put in a supporting role. I mean, to say he hates the idea is probably an understatement. I think it's driving him crazy, right? He just refuses to believe that America is going to be support troops
Yes.
in this fight. So they hit the beach. They secure the beachhead. really not a whole lot of contact that they come into, as far as when they hit the beach. The Italians and the Germans as well were kind of not prepared, or not thinking that that's what was going to happen. There's a few like decoy operations that were launched ahead of time, so the Axis powers that were in control of Sicily at the time were unaware that this was going to happen. So they secured the beachhead rather quickly and start moving inland. And like I said, you got the British moving up the eastern coast, and then you have the U.S. 7th Army protecting their left flank, moving up the western side of Sicily. Well, as soon as the British hit anything that slows them down, which they do numerous times, they run into a few bottlenecks, they start running into some stiff German resistance, and they get held up. And as soon as that happens, Patton badgers, and I mean, to the point where it's driving the guy crazy, but the commanding general that's in charge of the entire operation, he just starts badgering him. Please let me break out to the west. Let me break out to the west. I'm doing nothing. I'm twiddling my thumbs here.
Yeah.
And finally, this is the funny part. The commanding general gives Patton approval to conduct a reconnaissance of western Sicily, right? Well, Patton interprets that as being able to blitz the western part of the island, right?
Takes it
I got my
completely.
approval. Let's go,
Yeah.
And within
Wow.
a matter of days, he'll blitz through the entire western half of Sicily. Now, it's during this blitz offensive that Patton conducts on the western half of the island that Audie Murphy will kill his first two guys. And now, up to this point, he's had a little bit of experience with combat. I like to, in my mind, I kind of compare it to how our deployments worked out.
Okay.
We had our first deployment to Ramadi, Iraq.
Yeah.
And by the time we got to Ramadi, the craziness was pretty much over. There, while we were there, we had a few things happen.
Yep.
Enough to introduce you to the realities of war, but not enough to be like, this is freaking crazy.
Yeah.
We got to tiptoe into war in
Right.
a way. You know what I mean? It
Yep.
wasn't like we got the full-fledged taste of it right on the first deployment. It was the second one that was really crazy for us. And I feel like the same is true for Audie Murphy. Audie Murphy and the 15th Infantry Regiment are moving along with this blitz charge that Patton is conducting.
Okay.
And outside of a town, Audie Murphy sees two Italian officers mount horses and try to ride out of town as fast as they can, and he shoots them both.
Nice.
He'll get a little bit of flack, if you will, from his commanding officer, like, you didn't have to do that. Why'd you shoot him? And Audie Murphy, in his book, has a response of like, well, we're at war, aren't we?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't I do that?
Yeah, true.
And that's funny because you can see that kind of stuff play out even now, and it happens with new guys. It's always the new guy, because there's this weird. And tell me if this was your experience too. But there's like this weird hesitancy, like you feel like you're going to get in trouble almost.
Yeah.
Because it's so
Agreed.
ingrained in you not to kill, right? Like your whole life, you know that is a bad thing, right? And then you finally get into a position where you can kill freely. I mean, you're not going to be killing like civilians or anything like that, but the enemy, right? You can kill the enemy freely. It is a weird thing to get past, and I think a lot of the times when you see in movies when they talk about that hesitation, I think that's kind of what they're referring to, because I never saw guys hesitate in combat, but there is like this mental hurdle you got to get over. Like, dude, I'm getting ready to pull the trigger for real on somebody,
Yeah.
And I think that's what's happening between Audie Murphy and his commanding officer at this point. The Audie Murphy has accepted, okay, well, I'm here to do this. I'm going to do it. And he's probably jonesing for it, right? Like,
Right.
just like every, private in the infantry is wanting to do. But yeah, he
Who
gets
knows?
his
Some
first
of these
taste of
guys
combat.
might not have combat experience. Some of the officers, some of these guys, like, they're coming into it, like you said, first time. Not everybody who's arriving may have combat experience. So yeah, things
there's
are in
probably
question.
honestly, there's probably very few guys with combat experience at this point, because the only major campaign in that hemisphere of the world, that the European theater, Mediterranean, North Africa, all included in that. When I say European theater, is the guys that fought in North Africa, right? The
Right.
army has gotten much bigger since that point in the war. So just like Murphy, you have all these guys showing up, and it's their first time in combat, and that's no different for the officers either. Now, by the time, so there's the town of Palermo that is at the northwestern coast, coastline of Sicily. And by the time Patton's 7th Army Group and Audie Murphy being in the 15th Infantry Regiment as part of that 7th Army Group, by the time they reach the city of Palermo, Murphy is going to fall ill. And this will happen to Murphy repeatedly. I don't know if it's because he grew up, in a farming community way out in the middle of Texas, in the middle of nowhere, and now he's being exposed to living in these certain conditions around all these different guys and being in a foreign country. I mean, I got sick on both deployments, so it does make sense.
Oh yeah.
But he's going to get sick repeatedly. Now he'll try his hardest to not ever go back to the hospital or go back to the aid stations. He tries to stay with his unit as much as possible, but his problem is malaria. He catches malaria just over and over and over again. So by the time they reach Palermo, he's out of the fight for a week, and he'll kind of miss the rest of the fighting that moves eastward towards the northern tip of and towards Messina, right, towards the northern tip of Sicily.
Okay.
Now, it's during this fighting in Sicily that Murphy really becomes realistic with war, and I wanted to put this in there because I feel like the same thing happened to me when we had the IED incident happen at the ECP in Ramadi. Up to that point, I had never been in a gunfight still with the enemy. I hadn't experienced. To me, war was a vacation, and you get to tote a gun around. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then we have this major IED attack happen, and then you see it in real life, and you see the devastation and how real it is.
It certainly was.
It's a rude wake up call, man. I mean, it really is a rude wake up call, and you start getting realistic about it, because I know for a fact that because of that experience, and by the time we were preparing to go to Marja, my thoughts before Marja were way different than my thoughts before Ramadi, and what I needed to be prepared to do, and where I needed to be mentally, and all right, like you start understanding the realities of wanting your men to be trained up to a certain standard, because if crap hits the fan, that's who you're there with,
Yes.
and instead of playing video games, maybe you work on some 9 lines, maybe you work on, call for fire, maybe whatever the aspect of the fight you think you need to work on. Instead of wasting time, maybe you spend your time doing that, Also running. Like, as much as it sucks, you got to have that engine, you got to have that cardio engine. So
the conditioning, it's tough to be conditioned to it, but we kind of became conditioned, over our time in the Marine Corps. So, but it's different being in Iraq and you're mounted in trucks, Vics, and in Afghanistan you're on foot. You got to be, like you said, running. You got to be conditioned to be able to.
You're only getting there as fast as your feet can take you. Yeah. I mean, that's it. Now, Murphy will say this about the reality of warfare and what he's going to be facing for the next few years. Quote, "I have seen war as it actually is, and I don't like it, but I will go on fighting." And I feel like that's exactly kind of how I felt about it, right? Like, obviously, you don't. I mean, when you see the reality of combat, it's not something, there's no trumpets playing in the background, or patriotic music playing in the background. There's no feel-good vibes going on. It's death, and this. It has this guttural feeling of just evil always. I mean, you always I remember flying into Marja and landing at Riley and feeling like I just walked into a wave of evil. Like, you can feel it when you come off the bird.
You can feel it. You can smell it.
Well, Murphy is getting to this point, right? He's seen enough combat to know, okay, I'm in the show now. I know what I'm in for.